the wings, you're looking out over its head. Right now it's patrolling, looking for food. And I want you to note the change when it acquires its prey. So you can see it's always scanning, keeps moving around. Goes over the top of the pond. And immediately, decisively takes action. Bam. All right, so you can see it again in slow motion, or slower motion. Tips in, over the top, quartering, kill. Okay, so what can you learn from Dora the Falcon? The falcon's name is Dora. There's a number of things, most of which you know already, and most of which actually have been covered in the different breakout sessions, so hopefully this will serve to kind of tie some of these things together. First of all, you need to be as tactically and technically proficient as possible if you want to make things happen. One of the breakout sessions we were talking about trust, and the good way to gain trust is that you demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. Then your leadership is going to be like, okay, I can trust this person. When they come up with an off-the-wall idea, they've already shown me that they know the book inside and out. They know their job inside and out, so maybe I should listen. But it's not just about how you fly your airplane, how you employ your platoon. It's also about how do you navigate the bureaucracy. So, for instance, if PowerPoint is the way you get things done, you get decisions made, you need to know how to use PowerPoint. And not just all the formatting baloney, but you need to know how to craft an argument and put it on the slides and go and present it and make things happen. You have to know how the bureaucracy is structured, where the power centers are, and what you're going to do. You can't be someone who just complains and writes articles, but then can't get anything done because, I don't do politics, or I don't do PowerPoint, or I don't have time for that. If you want to make things happen, you have to be proficient, not just at the cool stuff, you also have to be proficient at the organizational things. Another thing that you can learn from Dora is that you have to plan out your attack. You have to be ready to flawlessly and violently execute your attack as soon as opportunity presents. So it's about thinking ahead, watching, the OODA loop, orient, observe. So you gotta bide your time, figure out exactly what you need to do to make that thing happen. So Dora starts out, she's in patrol, she sees the bird, and as soon as she sees that bird, she's crafted a three-dimensional attack in her head. You can see how it happens. Crosses over the top where the duck can't see her, and then a very short quartering attack from the side where it never sees the falcon coming. So, organizationally, you can do something like this. And when I say violent attack, violent doesn't always mean, yelling and screaming, and online charge from the get-go. A lot of times the most violent attacks have the stealthiest approach. So you need to figure out that right approach. And and a good attack is that no one knows that they're being attacked until they're struck and it's already over. The best attack is one that no one knows there was an attack at all. You just made a change somehow, and everyone's left scratching their head. What happened? All right, I guess we're going to do this new thing now. So you need to be smart in how you lay out your plan and how you navigate through those obstacles. And by being sneaky and stealthy, I'm not telling you to break any rules or laws or be nefarious. You just need to bide your time. And sometimes you're going to get a lot of no's, and sometimes the best way to avoid a no is just not ask the question and make things happen. You may get in trouble for that at some point, but at the same time, I think if you have the good intentions, you have that top cover somehow, you have a network out there, you're probably going to make it through if you've got good intentions. And then finally, remember that sometimes Dora misses. Dora the falcon. The duck might see her. It's not grass. It doesn't stay in the grass will stay in the trough. The duck could move, could see the attack coming. So you have to be persistent. You have to be willing to go hungry sometimes. You have to be willing to make mistakes. But you have to let that hunger and those failures continue to hone your skills and build your successes. Okay, so it's kind of nice to compare ourselves to falcons, especially for those of us who are pilots. Strokes our ego, but humans aren't falcons. That animal, every fiber in its body is attuned to one mission, which is to get that duck. For us, we're not that good, and even when we're skilled at one thing, the organization sometimes needs us to do different things. So no one likes to hear the cliche, bloom where you're planted, but sometimes you have to. So we'll switch from falcons to painters for a little bit. I think a lot of you probably know just what that tiny bit of painting is from. It's from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. This was, it's one of the most amazing works of art, and you could say that it was the culmination of Michelangelo's career as a painter, right? Not so much. Michelangelo wasn't a painter. Michelangelo was a sculptor. And the life's work that he wanted to do was sculpting this grand tomb for Pope Julius II. But all of his peers felt that he was getting a little bit too big for his britches. They kind of wanted to see him fail. I think he was a bit of an arrogant person. And so they whispered in the Pope's ear and said, "We know he's out there doing this tomb. Why don't you commission him to paint the Sistine Chapel?" They're like, you can see them all smugly laughing. This guy's he either has to deny the commission to the Pope, which is kind of a no-go from the get-go, or he's going to grandly and publicly fail at this massive project that the Pope's asking him to do. So what did Michelangelo do? He accepted the commission, and he spent the next 4 years of his life working on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So does this sound familiar to anybody? You get a really crappy assignment that you don't want. It doesn't use your skills, you don't think. And not only is it just bad management of personnel, you think that someone's doing it on purpose because they want you to fail. So be like Michelangelo. He turned what should have been a career-ending assignment into his biggest achievement that we're still talking about today. So if you want to be an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur, if you want to be a leader, you have to bloom where you're planted. You can't just turn off because you don't get the assignment that you want or you don't get the opportunity that you want. I think a lot of times that outside person, that outside perspective, the person who doesn't really necessarily want to be there, who isn't invested in this organization or this specific way of doing things, hasn't grown up there, a lot of times that gives you the insights to be like, why do we do it this way? Because we've always done it this way. Well, haven't you thought about this? This is what I did when I came from this outside organization. Can we apply that here? And sometimes, that's the innovation that's going to be, really, maybe one of the biggest things of your career, or the biggest accomplishments. But even if that's not the case, even if it's just a terrible assignment, you hate it, you're still learning, especially if you're someone who's really a meat eater. You're learning, and that may be the place where you pick up those dots. When Steve Jobs talked about connecting dots. You pick up those dots that then down the road enable you to combine your experiences to make that innovation and make that lasting change in an organization. So bloom where you're planted. because you're not necessarily a technician. You're not the inventor who's in a lab who's making one thing work very well if you want to be an entrepreneur. You may have that background, but eventually you need to grow beyond that, where you're an enabler. You're bringing ideas from one place to another, and you're making your team work well, and you're implementing an idea using your team. So the next important thing is that if you're not Michelangelo and you're not a falcon, you're going to have to be a team player. You're going to have to hunt in a pack. So you need to build those networks, and you need to work with the people around you to implement your ideas. And so in the breakout session I was just in was fantastic, talking about how you need to build your top cover, or hope that the top cover finds you, work with your team, delegate. There's cognitive limitations on what you can do, so you have to build that network out. And that's where not only are you going to get your support, when you fail, the cover that lets you continue to work, but also you're going to get more ideas from that network of people you talk to. I'm preaching to the choir literally here, because we're all here. We networked via the internet, and then we're networking in person now. So entrepreneurs, like I said, bring ideas together. They don't necessarily invent things, but they put things into action. The example of the mouse is a good one. So the computer mouse was not invented by Apple or by Steve Jobs. It was invented by a guy named Doug Engelbart in the 60s. And so this is what the original mouse looked like. Clearly not what we've been using today. So after it was initially invented, then the Xerox PARC laboratory improved on it, but it was about a $300 piece of specialty equipment that you're not going to buy that for your home computer. But Steve Jobs saw the mouse there, and then brought that idea back to his team. And he told his team, hey, there's this great idea out there. They've got it at this laboratory, but it's not really an idea we can implement on a grand scale. I need you to build this and make it work for under $15 a copy, I think was the number. And so after some time, they took that idea from another team, they took the vision and the constraint that Steve Jobs gave them, and they created a mouse that revolutionized the computer, how we use computers today. So remember, you're not a lone actor, you're not the Falcon, you're working in a network, and you're trying to connect all those ideas and those capabilities to make things happen. And that's where we get to this definition. This is from Joseph Schumpeter, who is a famous economist. I'll give you a second to read it. There's two key things there. One is act with confidence beyond the range of familiar beacons. And the end part of it is getting things done. So your eyes are fixed forward, you're immediate, or head up, moving forward fixed eyes. You want to get things done. But Steve Jobs' challenge, for instance, was in a lot of ways easier than the one that you're going to face. Steve Jobs had his team, he had his vision, and he was able to go out and make things happen and let the market sort things out, which it eventually did in spades. Of course, I'm making that sound a lot easier than it was, but Steve Jobs didn't have an entire organization that was very routine bound, very status quo, working against him when he was trying to make the mouse, for instance. So you're not just fighting the world of the unfamiliar, you're also fighting those that are afraid you're going to upset their trough full of grass. You're fighting the leaf eaters. Now, some of these people are true leaf eaters. They're the petty tyrant bureaucrat. But a lot of the other ones are well-intentioned people who think that who maybe are weed eaters as well. They believe that your change is going to make the organization less effective, so they're going to fight you tooth and nail. And so you have to use all of these things I've talked about to figure out how you're going to navigate, how you're going to make your approach, how you're going to have all your forces aligned, and then how you can sell that idea, how you can convince others, especially those ones who are honestly defending the organization, how to convince them that your approach is right. And then use your network to provide you all that assistance and the top cover necessary. And if you do fail, that network is what's going to pick you up and keep you moving forward. So this amazing group has seen so much over the past decade or more, and clearly has the passion and drive to move forward, to make things happen like Schumpeter was talking about. And so our elders are leaving us a world in crisis. It's not just the DoD, it's not just the government. There's going to be no end to the challenges that we're going to face moving ahead. But as much as people like to talk about the millennials and the youth today, I know that this group and others like it are very well prepared to take up the challenges, to do this sort of networking, to question the status quo, and to move beyond those familiar beacons to get something meaningful done. My last word of caution is that it's really easy and kind of self-gratifying, and I've fallen into this trap myself a lot, to get caught up in the big ideas, the big issues. For me, it's, how do I change the entire Marine Corps? How do I, argue about national security policy, but that just leads to frustration and disgruntlement. So, especially I think at this age group, including myself, you just worry about this. Start off with the small, meaningful things. Affect things locally, and as you build successes, maybe then you can get to some of those bigger problems. But a lot of us just blow a lot of hot air at these big, exciting ideas when we're missing opportunities to do great things locally. So, with that in closing, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them, or we can talk later on if we want to get on to lunch. Yes.
So, Pete, the talk of leaf eaters versus meat eaters reminded me of something. Alfred Thayer Mahan wrote an essay long ago where he talked about naval administration, and he talked about the administrator versus the combat officer. And he lamented the combat officer not having enough influence within military departments. But he also said that there's important value in a good administrator. And it kind of made me think of your leaf eaters. Is there a place for the leaf eater?
Yeah, this is, so admittedly this is a bit of a rhetorical distinction, and there's a lot of shades of gray in there, but the good administration is critical to running an organization, especially one as big as the DoD or a lot of other corporations that are out there. So there's room for those people to, the people who aren't necessarily as action oriented. It's the guy who comes in every day, looks at the spreadsheets and does all the math that would drive, I think, a lot of people in this room crazy. You need people to do that. And I think my distinction, there's kind of these polar things I'm talking about, and then there's a bunch in the middle. But my distinction is more of, the stereotypical GS-15, who is, the bane of everybody's existence. That's the sort of thing. The people who, hey, look, I'm coming in today to get my paycheck. I don't want my Apple Card upset. I am not going to stick my neck out, and I'm going to make sure that you don't create work for me. So that's kind of the one polar stereotype that is out there, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, there are some of those folks that are in positions that are key choke points for innovation. And they're the ones who are going to, if you aren't careful, they're going to see you coming over top, and they're going to get out of the way, and now you've exposed yourself. And if you don't have that network out there looking for you, you're not done for, I think, career-wise, but you've shot your wad on that issue.
How would you sustain innovation and leadership? Because I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking some time ago, Ray Mabus, Secretary of the Navy, threw out using Lean and Six Sigma practices from the business world, brought them into the Department of the Navy, and it sounded like a great idea, right? It's going to improve performance. But over time, it just became a weapon to continue to justify the way we're doing things already. Well, we're performing 10% better than we were last year, regardless of whether the system is relevant or not. How would you take innovation, sustain it, nurture it, and keep it from calcifying into another status quo?
My opinion on the calcification is that you need, and I kind of liken it to like a forest with the undergrowth. If it doesn't burn out or get weeded out, it eventually chokes off the growth. And government is that way, corporations are that way. You get resource advantage, you get successful or protected, you can't really get rid of the DoD, right? Then the system degenerates. And so, I don't have a simple answer for that, but I think what you need to do is you need to have smart personnel policies that go in and weed out some of these people who are just taking up space. I think a lot of our issues come down to leadership and the fact that it's impossible to get rid of people. It's like on the military side, I'm not real familiar with defense civilians, but on the military side, until recently, the only way to get rid of someone is complete black and white. DUI, infidelity, all those kind of Navy times, Marine Corps times, Air Force times things, counterfeit poker chips, But what about the gray area guy? This guy's a terrible leader. He's running the organization into the ground. I can put some metrics on it, but not necessarily He's blocking innovation. People want to get away from toxic leadership. You don't see people getting fired for that very often unless it sparks an investigation that they get him on something else. So I think that we need to get more serious about weeding out the deadwood. It's a very it's easy to say, not easy to do.
And on that note, I know you said it's not easy to do. We're actually going to have a mediation group on the personnel policy. So I know it's really bound up in law, regulations. What can anybody do, let alone we do, when it comes to actually dealing with these personnel kind of issues?
Well, at the kind of at the higher end where where the rubber really meets the road, I don't have the experience to necessarily talk about that. At that point, everything gets very opaque and kind of behind closed doors. But I think at our level, company field grade officer level, document, have moral courage, go out there, OERs, fit reps. If someone's doing poorly, document it, and then use it to get rid of them. And you can't get rid of them, but you can get them out of those key developmental assignments. You can stop putting a major who's been passed over for good cause. Not necessarily clear like a DUI, but this person does not deserve to be a lieutenant colonel. But I feel bad, so I'm going to put him in the position again. And he got picked up because he got put in some, general officer staff, and now he got picked up for lieutenant colonel, and he keeps going on and on. So I think some of the things can be handled at our level. You won't see the results of that until 10, 15 years down the road.
There's some behavioral psychologists and folks doing research, Carol Dweck at Stanford, for example, you read about they're thinking that what often looks like people problems frequently is a structural problem. Do you have, if something is absolutely true, we've all seen our share of staff sergeants in that GS-15 position. Are there structural issues that you see beyond the personnel?
Absolutely, and that's a good. When you look at one of the kind of theoretical lenses I like is high reliability organizations, and they talk about being obsessed with failure, and so whenever there's an incident, you kind of get obsessed with why there was a failure, but it's not about who failed, it's about what failed, because if you're a high reliability organization, you should have all the controls in place so that unless someone does something egregious, you mitigate your risk. So, I do acknowledge that there's a lot of structural things in place that kind of lead to where we're at, and it's a huge topic. A lot of which has to do with law, has to do with how our personnel policies are structured legally, what the interests are there. But still, I think there's a lot of tools that are out there that can be used to better manage people that we don't want to do, because we have this sense of you're entitled to get to your 20-year retirement, especially if you're, once you've gotten to the level of 04 or E6, and you're entitled to this and that, and we don't want to, we don't want someone to have to retire as a major, because we wish, we want everyone to retire as a lieutenant colonel, even if they don't really, we don't want to put them in a lieutenant colonel leadership role. So it's those sorts of things where I think we can work with the system a bit more, and then you get into, and I haven't thought about it deeply enough, systematically enough, the Tim Kaine argument of how you restructure and make a market-based personnel system, it's a huge animal to wrestle with, I guess. Yes.
Speaking of structural issues, do you think that the 20-year military retirement policy has a role in the mediators looking elsewhere for opportunities? Because if the duck isn't in the DoD anymore, then you're going to go outside of it, just like you did to chase it, where the 20-year system kind of encourages a lazy river approach. So if you sit in your industry for 20 years, you're going to make it, whereas a hawk who's looking for another opportunity, you're not going to sit on an interview. But there's a certain amount of that involved in a DoD career. So how do we change that as a privatized retirement policy, where it's not a magic number, but it's a 401k that grows with time? Could that help?
Those sorts of things I think could help, but there's so many spin-off, second order, third order effects from that You know, I'm not going to say that yes, you know, this, that, or the other solution is going to make things change. But I do believe, I don't know that the 20-year retirement paradigm is leading to people getting out earlier or later or whatever. But I do think that it keeps some of the, you know, my stereotypical leaf eaters in. I mean, I know folks personally who were passed over for 05. They're really kind of just whiling away their years as a staff officer. And when the early retirement opportunity came up, I heard friends ask them, "Hey, are you gonna jump on this and get out of this, you know, pain you're living in?" No way. I'm staying until I can get that, maximize that 20 years. And it's like, you know, that's not what we want to happen. You know, so I think it does encourage some people to stay in past their useful life.
We'll take one more and then break for lunch.
Sir.
So I think there is an answer to this question. It's called innovation culture. You can create the conditions that support innovation and individuals. The chief condition of which is called respectful listening. Innovators don't take orders that well, but if you listen to them, something can be harvested from those ideas. And if you're one of those people with ideas, you're a hypocrite if you don't listen to other people's ideas too. So if you want to be an innovator, you want to contribute to a value system where you want people to respect your ideas. You need to respect other people's ideas so that together in an innovation culture, you can create the conditions that cause those innovators to not run away or not shut up. You can nurture them, you can support them, and the best way is by respectful listening.
You know, and to close on that, you know, I agree 100%. Some of the frustrations, very candidly, that kind of started pushing me out the door and to look for something else in the Marine Corps is just the way that you see, you know, people treated based on rank. And, you know, I had some terribly toxic leaders that, you know, they look at you as all they can see is what's right here. And even though they're fairly unintellectual and really are not engaged and they don't even know their own job very well, they assume that whatever you're saying is probably wrong because you're not, you know, however many levels up in the organization. On the other hand, you know, I work for senior general officers who, I don't want to say treated me, very close to treating me like a peer. You know, there's that mentor, you know, senior subordinate relationship, but I got far more respect out of a 3-star than I got out of some lieutenant colonels and colonels. And you know, that sort of thing is exactly what we need. You know, we need the leadership to listen to people regardless of rank. And even when they're completely wildly off the mark, if you listen to them and then mentor and bring them along, you know, you're going to get a better product in the end. And, you know, if you're listening, you might just find out something that you didn't know. And I know a lot of the, you know, some of the general officers that I talk to, part of the problem is that they're so insulated by the kind of the level of the 05, 06 in their staff that they don't find things out until they go and sit down and, you know, get face to face with people. Of course, that's the way we want to lead, is get out, get about. It's really hard for some people in those, you know, high tempo roles to do. But, you know, you've got to do that, but at the same time, you can't have those folks filtering information and trying to stifle innovation, stifle thoughts. Don't bring this up to the old man, you know, things like that. So it's you know, some leaders do that, but then there's a cultural kind of aversion to that free flow of information that even when you have someone in a position of leadership that's encouraging that, it doesn't always get through all the way. So thanks for your questions, I appreciate it.